Hello, Idaho, and welcome back to our STEM Matters virtual week of celebration. We are so excited to have you here today. And right now, we are just about to jump into a discussion about what we're seeing in labor trends and the state of STEM in Idaho's economy. And here to jump into some of the details and data is a labor economist with the Idaho Department of Labor, Sam Wolkenhauer. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Hi, happy to be here.
Awesome. So to kick things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, the work you do over at the Department of Labor?
Well, I am an economist in our Communications and Research Bureau, and so a lot of what I do is creating projections for Idaho's labor market. So trying to figure out what occupations, what industries are going to be growing, so that we can not only help employers and educational institutions, but also young people decide on a viable career path and figure out what kind of jobs are going to be needed, and so where are they going to be able to make a thriving career in Idaho's economy.
Awesome. So it sounds like you are exactly the right person to chat with about this topic today.
We'll find out.
So to set the stage, what sort of trends are you seeing related to STEM in Idaho?
Well, STEM continues to grow very quickly in Idaho. STEM occupations are growing faster than the rest of the economy. In our current projection, we think that the need for STEM workers is going to grow at a little over 16% over the next 10 years. And if you compare that to non-STEM jobs, those are only growing at about 11 to 12% per year. So they are outpacing the rest of the economy, and they're growing in importance over time. STEM, as it relates to healthcare, is growing particularly fast. We think that healthcare occupations that we categorize as STEM are going to grow at about 20% over that time period, so much faster than the rest of the economy. Another thing that's important to know is that the benefits of education have been amplified by COVID. We all know that there have been a lot of job losses associated with COVID, but college-educated workers have done much better in terms of retaining their jobs. So unemployment is more than twice as high right now for people who don't have a bachelor's degree as those that do. So over time, the importance of education and finding a really viable, vibrant career path is getting more important.
It sounds like it. And a lot of that data tracks with some of the conversations that we've had with industry partners throughout our virtual STEM Matters Celebration Week. Our partners over at St. Alphonsus Trinity Healthcare Systems have noted a number of different growing career pathways that are available for Idahoans to stay right here and pursue a career in healthcare.
Absolutely.
So how important is it, would you say, to having a skilled STEM workforce for Idaho's overall economic prosperity?
Sure. So STEM makes up a large portion of Idaho's workforce. About 12% of Idaho's workers are categorized as a STEM worker based on their occupational title, so more than 1 out of 10. And it's also important to note that they tend to be concentrated in really high value-add industries. So when we talk about STEM, that includes healthcare first and foremost. About half of the STEM workers in Idaho are in healthcare. And obviously, healthcare is among the most important sectors of the economy. You probably could make the case that it's the most important. It's definitely the largest. So healthcare alone makes up about 10% of Idaho's economy. So not only are STEM workers a large portion of our economy, but they're concentrated in very high value-add industries.
Awesome. And I imagine that we see a lot of peripheral careers alongside folks who are working directly in healthcare services, things like technology support and things like that. So these healthcare employers employ a lot of STEM workforce.
Correct.
So healthcare, as you said, is the biggest portion of our STEM economy here in Idaho, employing about 10% of Idaho's economy. So what are some other really large segments of Idaho's economy in general, and especially our STEM economy?
Sure. So when you think of STEM and you think of STEM careers, people probably think of one of two things. They either think of healthcare, or they think of programming and technology. They
Mhm.
think of software companies, Facebook, etc. But actually, STEM is distributed all around the economy. You have a lot of technologists and engineering positions, IT, all over different sectors of the economy, manufacturing, construction, a lot of technology firms. A lot of large firms have very large and very important in-house IT departments. So when we talk about STEM, we're not talking about a specific industry per se. We're talking about a skill set that in 2021, let's face it, it's relevant to every sector of the economy. So like you said, healthcare, there's obviously a lot of healthcare technicians and practitioners, but it's also a very IT intensive industry. So you have STEM distributed throughout the economy, and it's what lets corporations function in the modern era.
Awesome. So there are sort of two thoughts that I had as you were talking. You said that we see these types of STEM skills versus specific types of STEM occupations that are required for our economic success. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what are some of these STEM and STEM related skills, and how might the layout look like as we look region to region throughout Idaho?
Sure. So there's obviously a lot of regional variation within Idaho. You have most of Idaho's economy is centered on Boise. We all know that, but there's a lot of really advanced manufacturing strung throughout Idaho, and that's incredibly engineering and technology intensive. So we want to kind of break this idea that we have that STEM just means, that you work for a big technology firm and you program apps, and it's really a lot more diverse than that. So up here in northern Idaho, where I live, for example, we have Quest up in
Mhm.
Sandpoint, and they make airplanes, right? So it's when we talk about coding and technology and engineering, you've got a lot of advanced manufacturing. And here in northern Idaho, I could go on and on about all the cool firms that we have up here that make composite thermoplastics to airplanes, medical devices, etc. But these are all technology intensive, very advanced manufacturing processes.
So it sounds like here in Idaho, we might need to add a second M to STEM that stands for manufacturing.
You very well could. I don't know how you'd pronounce it.
STEM, we'll just hold the M. And I've seen that as well as I've traveled throughout the state. A lot of manufacturing. We have a lot of manufacturing partners here who are working in things like 3D printing here in the Treasure Valley, and a lot of metal manufacturing going on over in eastern Idaho as well to support a lot of the other work that's being done out there.
Absolutely.
So STEM is a hot topic when we're talking about the economy, about jobs, and what, as we're looking at why that is, a lot of it seems to be that a lot of these jobs are in demand. Employers are needing a skilled workforce. So how hard is it to fill some of these jobs throughout the state that require STEM skills?
Well, it's very difficult, and we can talk about why that's going to get more difficult in a minute.
Mhm.
But at the Department of Labor, we publish a product that we call our hot jobs list. And essentially, the idea of the hot jobs list is to give young people or anyone considering a career change a snapshot of what jobs are going to be both important, they're numerous, so there's going to be lots of opportunities, but also that pay well. So we're trying to
Mhm.
balance demand and pay. And so if you look at our hot jobs list, STEM occupations are very overrepresented there. So if you look at our top 100 jobs, about half of them are STEM. And if you look just at the top 25 jobs, 19 of those are STEM jobs.
Wow, those are like, as we get more and more toward the top of those hot jobs, it sounds like more and more an increasing portion of those require STEM skills.
Yes, and there's a mixture up at the top. So there's a lot of healthcare occupations, but you also have computer and IT, you have some engineering type positions. So there's a good mixture of representatives from across, all four
Mhm.
letters of STEM.
Yeah, and is that trend projected to continue in the near future?
We think so. These are the fastest growing jobs in Idaho. So like I said, STEM jobs are growing faster than the rest of the economy. So over time, these are going to become more and more important to our economy.
And that's really important for a lot of the students who might be watching who are trying to pick a career path forward. Maybe they should take a look at that hot jobs list to look at some of the skill sets and some of the opportunities that are available and projected to remain available in the coming years.
Absolutely. And all of this is on our website. We encourage people to look at the hot jobs list, go through. We have an occupational handbook that they can look at and get really into the details of a given occupation and what they would need to do to get into that field.
Awesome. So as we are looking to advise students on some of the ways that they can prepare to enter Idaho's workforce and remain here in Idaho in the future, what are some of the skills that Idaho's employers are looking for, especially in STEM skills?
Well, that's a pretty broad question because STEM, as we've mentioned, covers a really wide range of occupations. So there's a lot of demand for both technologist and technician type occupations, but also, you know, in healthcare, there's demand across the board for virtually everything you can think of in healthcare. So if you look at the hot jobs list that we publish, for example, you know, 8 out of the top 10 are going to be healthcare occupations. And so maybe in the middle of COVID, it's a little harder to sell somebody on a healthcare job because we all know how much duress they've been under and how hard they've been working.
Right.
This is really the economic engine of the future. And there's a lot of demographic reasons for that. People are living longer, trying to stay healthy longer. Idaho has a growing population. But the demand in the healthcare field, it sounds like a cliche because we talk about it so much, but numerically, it really is one of the drivers of growth.
Right. And these trends that we're seeing in healthcare fields, those existed and those started long before this sort of healthcare boom that we're experiencing with COVID right now, correct?
Absolutely. It has to do with two things. One is that Idaho is one of the fastest growing states from a population perspective. We're pretty consistently either 1 or 2 for population growth in terms of rankings. So people need healthcare. Growing population just naturally translates to more demand for healthcare services. But also you have the baby boomers reaching their retirement age. And here's a couple things we can all agree on about the baby boomers. There are a lot of them, and they are the first generation to reach retirement, both with a lot of disposable income and in pretty good health. Because historically, people were pretty burnt out by the time they got to retirement because so much of the work that was done was manual labor. So the baby boomers hit retirement and they're in pretty good shape financially and physically. They want to stay healthy. They want to actually enjoy their retirement. Imagine that. So this all leads to increased demand for physical therapy and various healthcare services to try to keep them healthy so they can enjoy their retirements.
Absolutely. So I want to return to a point that we touched on just a minute ago about these hard to fill jobs. And you mentioned that we could have a little conversation about why these are hard to fill. Part of it,
Sure.
I imagine, is just the rapid growth relative to the overall economy.
Sure.
What are some other reasons that you've identified why these are really hard to fill here in Idaho?
Sure. So at a very basic level, the reason you always end up with hard to fill jobs is because there is always a lag between how fast workers can be trained and when they're needed. So at a very base level, the way we would think of this is young people are responding to what is needed by industry, but training and education takes years. So there's this lag to get the labor pipeline online to match the needs of industry. So you already had that going on. But COVID has created a new challenge in the form of widespread and potentially permanent teleworking. Because what this means is that Idaho employers, in a lot of cases, are now going to be competing with other labor markets when it comes to workers who can telework. So you're going to end up with a much more fluid labor market where there are fewer physical constraints. And so we've already seen this in 2020. When COVID started, you ended up with a lot of really high earning professionals moving to Idaho because suddenly they can live here and continue working for their existing employer, but now they no longer have to, live in a really congested urban area in these coastal markets. We're all tired of teleworking, working from home, but imagine how much worse it is when you're working out of a 400 square foot closet in San Francisco, right? So COVID led to teleworking. Teleworking emancipated these workers from having to live in the same place that they work. So these barriers between labor markets are breaking down, and that has pluses and minuses. One of the good things about this is we really think it's going to help the rural areas of Idaho. Rural communities often have trouble attracting skilled workers because professionals tend to marry other professionals. One of the big there's a lot of matching that goes on between the education level of spouses and partners in this country. So you can imagine the challenge that, say, a rural hospital has. They need to attract a nurse or some other qualified worker, and it's really hard because often they can find the worker, but maybe that community doesn't have a job for that person's partner.
Right.
So teleworking can help rural communities in Idaho attract labor because now that nurse's partner can work remotely somewhere else. So that's a huge boost to rural Idaho. Now, the downside of this is that suddenly Idaho firms have to compete with other firms for workers. And often there's going to be a lot of upward pressure on wages. And so the advent of teleworking is going to break down barriers between labor markets, and it's going to create more intensified competition for workers for Idaho firms. So that's something that we want to be aware of. It's not something that we're paying attention to at the moment because everyone's, for obvious reason, been distracted by the virus. But once the virus has, hopefully, if ever, been taken care of and we can kind of move on to our new normal, there are going to be all these changes that are going to affect the structure of our economy permanently.
Right. Yeah, and that ties into a previous discussion that we had yesterday with the Department of Commerce about the broadband initiative, which is bringing internet connectivity to a lot of places in the state where it might be less reliable currently, but in the future, opportunities in telehealth and remote work could expand in these communities, which, as you said, has those mixed effects. So then looking at some of the top segments of our STEM economy, you mentioned healthcare, which has the opportunity for telehealth, but also requires some hands-on services, as well as manufacturing that can't be done from a 400 square foot apartment, right?
Sure.
So are these projected to potentially be some more reliable segments of our STEM economy in the future?
We think so. Our projections show that manufacturing and healthcare should be very robust sectors of Idaho's economy in the future. Manufacturing has had a bumpy road in America with all the offshoring that's happened over the past decades, and it's really gone through a lot of changes, but it's been a growth industry for Idaho, which is something that we're really happy to see because that's definitely not been the case in every state.
Awesome. And you also mentioned this training gap, this education gap between the need now and what the actions that we can take now to fill future need. And that's where organizations like the STEM Action Center or like Workforce Development Council and some of our partners around the state can really jump in and start to boost the educational support and the training support, not just for these skilled STEM-specific fields like healthcare, but also in some of the more skilled trades that support manufacturing, looking at machinists, looking at plumbing and welders and things like that. So those are also projected to be some pretty high-paying, in-demand fields throughout the state. So
absolutely.
What would you recommend from a data standpoint, be some of the actions that we take in the next couple of years to really ensure that that gap that we have between training and workforce need is lessened?
Well, it's always difficult to plan effectively because, as I mentioned earlier, there's always this lag in how long it takes to get new skilled workers into the economy. So what we want to do to make the economy and our labor market function more efficiently, for lack of a better term, I'll just use efficiently,
Sure.
is we want to equip young people to make good decisions effectively coming right out of high school. We are looking at a long-term labor crunch right now with COVID and all the job loss that have happened. It's easy to forget that before COVID happened, Idaho had a very severe labor shortage. We had rock bottom unemployment rates. It was very difficult for employers to find people. And so COVID has kind of temporarily distracted us from that, caused all these new problems. But we don't want to lose sight of the long-term picture. And the long-term picture was we were looking at a very major labor shortage that we were expecting to get worse over time as more and more baby boomers retire and they leave the labor force. Labor shortage is going to be kind of the prevailing condition for Idaho long term. So we don't want to lose sight of that big picture issue. And even with what's gone on with COVID, we need to be aware that COVID, so they tell me, is going to end. But these big demographic issues are going to be long-standing for us to overcome.
Yeah. So looking at things like the labor shortage, I've heard stories of different companies around the state needing to import a labor force, which can be costly and have other effects on individual businesses who need to fill these jobs. What are some of the other challenges that you've heard coming from businesses around the state to fill that labor shortage, and maybe some of the other issues that especially our STEM businesses are facing?
Well, labor shortage, definitely a major issue. Pre-COVID, there were many surveys done of small businesses where they would be asked, well, what's the biggest issue for your business? And labor availability, the cost of labor, was consistently one of, if not the top priority listed. Now with COVID, of course, everything goes out the window and the rules temporarily stop applying. But the main issue is that we're facing an upward crunch on wages, especially as Idaho firms have to compete with out-of-state firms due to the teleworking phenomenon that we've talked about. So we are looking at upward pressure on our wages, and that's something that firms are just kind of going to have to get used to. There are certain major market forces at work beyond anything that the Idaho Department of Labor can control that are going to drive wages upward. So that's just going to become our new normal. One of the major things making it hard to get new labor into the state is the cost of housing. So this is something that gets talked about a lot. Even in a COVID year, home prices in Idaho rose significantly. So we're looking at this really tricky situation where Idaho has a lot of in-migration. That's good. It's creating new economic activity, but it's driving the price of housing up. You can't get new housing online fast enough because there's a shortage of construction labor and lots that are platted and infrastructure, et cetera. And so we run the risk of dispossessing our residents by making housing cost prohibitive for them.
Right.
So it's this weird, it's an old analogy, but there's this weird chicken and the egg relationship between workers and housing. Price goes up. And so this is a logjam that we're going to have to work our way through, but we don't want to dispossess Idaho residents by making housing too expensive for them.
Right. Housing costs, labor shortage, STEM skills, hot jobs. We've covered a lot, but we've only scratched the surface in our discussion today. Sam, how can folks who are watching at home find more and keep abreast of all of this latest information that's coming in from the Department of Labor?
Sure. So we're very transparent with our data. All of our projections are on our website. If you go to lmi.idaho or .labor.idaho.gov, LMI for labor market information, you can find our projections, information on occupations. I would also encourage people, especially if you have a student who's contemplating career choices, to look up the occupational handbook. That is provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's our federal umbrella agency, and that will have really intricate details on different occupations, what the work entails, what kind of training goes into that, etc. It's a really thorough, exhaustive document, so you can find the answer to virtually any question you have about career choices in there.
Awesome. Sam, anything else that you want the folks watching at home to know about the work that you do or the state of STEM in Idaho?
I just encourage people not to lose track of the bigger trends that are going on in Idaho. 2020 was a rough year for everybody. Idaho's labor market took a big hit, a lot of volatility, a lot of jobs lost, and obviously they're important issues. But once we recover from that, we are going to be facing the issues that we were used to, that we kind of become inured to by the time COVID hit: labor shortage, housing prices, broadband. All of these themes are going to persist, and COVID distracted us, but it isn't going to change any of these big structural issues.
Persistent problems are going to require some pretty creative solutions. Sam,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Happy Friday.
You too.
That was Sam Wolkenhauer, a labor economist over at the Idaho Department of Labor, helping us get a little update on the state of STEM in Idaho's economy. This is one of our virtual celebration events for our STEM Matters Week of Celebration. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will catch you next time.